record. All right, here we go. All right, I am now going to introduce our speaker tonight, Harvey Castro. He is a documentary photographer exploring the relationship between climate change, immigration, identity, and inclusion. He was born in Nicaragua in 1974. Harvey relocated to the Bay Area with his mother in 1982 to join his father and older siblings. During a family gathering when his cousin brought a Minolta camera, Harvey's fascination with photography began, igniting his passion for capturing moments behind the lens. In his early years, Harvey received his first camera in the 5th grade, just before embarking on the school's annual camp, Outdoor Ed. And throughout his adult life, Harvey ventured into different industries, including labware manufacturing, software, where he excelled as director of software operations and sales for a supply chain optimization developer until May 2018. And however, over the past 5 years, Harvey fully dedicated himself to his true calling, documentary photography, employing a wide range of mediums from still and moving images to audio recordings and historical content. He delves into the intricate complexities of our world, aiming to inspire social change and provoke thoughtful reflection among viewers. Harvey distinguishes himself by his genuine connection with the people he photographs. Drawing inspiration from his personal experiences as an immigrant and person of color, he showcases the strength and resilience of individuals facing adversity. Through portraits and candid moments of joy, struggle, and emotion, Harvey's photographs vividly portray the multifaceted lives within various communities. So I'm very excited, and thank you, Harvey, for being here tonight. And you can share your screen.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thank you all for having me. I'm feeling very fortunate to get a chance to, sit with you all and talk a little bit about my transition into documentary photography. As Stephanie mentioned, coming from a more traditional world, I guess, software development and manufacturing, supply chain, logistics management. But as far away as those two worlds appear, part of what has been my way of navigating the world has been looking for ways of, really repurposing the lessons that I learned in one area of my life to the next area and so forth. Kind of like a cut and paste, essentially, right? One thing that I started noticing is like even in software in the different systems that we use, right? Control C and Control V is the same whether you're using Microsoft or you're using an Apple, right? It's pretty much the same. So I've always employed that in the way that I approached new endeavors, new challenges, new interests, new curiosities. So can you guys see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so before I get started, I don't have any slides. I don't have anything other than photos and PDFs and some videos that I want to share with you that kind of keystone some of the key moments in my development evolution to what I'm doing now. So what I'm planning to do with you guys for the next however minutes this takes is to kind of walk you through visually that transition. And at key moments, we'll pause. And if you have questions or you have anything that you want to add to the conversation, because I want this to be a conversation, please feel free to hit the raise your hand button, and Stephanie will be moderating, so she knows for me to take a little more time to address some questions that you may have. Because I know that sometimes a question comes up, and if you wait till the end, life happens and you forgot, right? The dog's barking, something's happening around you, and it's like, missed it. So I get it. Don't feel bad about interrupting or about integrating into the conversation. So although I want to focus on the last 10 years of this journey for me, I'm starting with an image that you're seeing on your screen now that was taken on my first trip to Puerto Rico, and this is in 2005. And I start here because Puerto Rico what I want to do is I want to echo some of the key points and some of the patterns that start to appear along this timeline. Okay, so for me, everything that we're going to focus on today in terms of my work and where it's gone to really starts at this point, right? Because prior to this, I was making photos that were, my way of, at the time, I wouldn't have phrased it this way, but it was more meditational. It was more of a way of finding balance in my life, right? So I would basically take off and, just explore landscapes, explore whatever came up that looked interesting to photograph. I just wanted to, express my my visual creativity. And actually, one of the first tools that helped me in that process, and you guys are from the Bay Area, so I know you probably remember this. Way back when KQED had a had a drive, right? And with their drives, they always give you something, as a contributing member. And in one of those years, I remember that. And by the way, I don't have any formal training in photography. This is just all just started with a fascination with the camera, with the tool, with the object, and then it became a way of finding peace within myself and exploring the world. So one of the what I remember listening to KQED NPR, and in one of those drives, they were giving away these flashcards from Bay Area back roads, right? I don't know if you guys can see these, and I still have them, right? So so some of the things that I still have that take me back to when I first started, really exploring the world through my lens are these flashcards, because what I would do is I'd basically open it up and pull out a card. And it was all within the Bay Area. So I could, just pack my car with my tripod, my camera, some film, and just go out and explore and get lost in the Bay Area, So I remember pulling out, Jenner one year and just getting on in my Ford Escort and driving up the coast, looking for Jenner. So that's really how I started to engage the world through photography. Fast forward, as an adult, I moved to New Hampshire. I was managing a labware manufacturing facility out there. And the opportunity came up to photograph a wedding in Puerto Rico. By this time, I had already been living in New Hampshire for about 2-3 years. And I was ready to come back home, come back to California, in the process of being there. And I got there through acquisition. We went through 2 other acquisitions. So all the work that we had been doing, we had to start over and over again. So at this point where you see this photo, I'm like at the end of of my career there. Actually, when I came back, I think I put in my resignation, and by February of 2016, this is in December of 2005. So the following month, I'm packing my car. I had a Acura CL at the time. Started packing my car and driving back to California, right? So along the way, the way I took that trip was I bought a TomTom GPS at Sam's Club, programmed the places where I wanted to stop, and I just let it guide me. And I ended up, in New Orleans. So when I got to New Orleans, this had been 5 months post Katrina. And I think, we all remember the images that we saw in the television. If you were there, then you know exactly what that feels like, being present for that kind of devastation. But otherwise, I hadn't ever been in that kind of environment. So for me, this was the first time seeing the devastation that's left behind still months after a natural disaster strikes an area, right? But again, what I had been focusing on in my photography up to that point, outside of making family photos, is a lot of landscape. I would pack my car the same as I did back when I was at home. I would pack my car with my tripod, my cameras, and just go out and explore the White Mountains, Vermont, Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But never really engaging with the local communities and really never engaging with the people that represented the places that I was photographing outside of the landscapes or the cityscapes that we all know, right? So as I, start exploring New Orleans, these are some of the images that I captured. The majority of them, have, not a lot of people in them. So this is, I went to, I think one of the voodoo stores that they have there. So it's kind of going in there and understanding the culture, understanding the things that I was seeing and capturing the things that pulled my eye. Here I was driving around, and the way I really got introduced to this area is that I was on my way to the airport to drop off my girlfriend to the airport because she was going back to school. She was doing her degree in nursing at USF, and she had to get back. So on the way to the airport, I programmed my GPS to say, point of interest, POI, gas station. Well, the TomTom GPS has no idea what's really happening in the real world, right? Not in 2006. It's not like, Waze today that will guide you through everything that's happening or in front of you, including, speed scanners, right? Back here is just taking you to the destination that's programmed within the software that it came with. So it's taking me to the nearest gas station, and it takes me out to, I think it was right before we got to the airport, and I started seeing all of these scenes that were appearing in front of me. I went to after I dropped off my girlfriend, I came back to explore the area. So I went to the cemeteries and really started exploring the areas and what was left behind. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was documenting, but I knew that it was important to capture these images, at least for myself, so I could go back and reference and have an idea of what I felt at this time in my life, as I'm transitioning from living in the East Coast back to California. So everything was desolate. My experience of seeing people in the streets was, far off in the distance, folks wearing hazmat, suits, walking in the middle of the streets, Got out of the highway to look for for the gas station. And I just remember seeing this McDonald's, which, we're not used to seeing the golden arches in those conditions. This is one of the first people that I saw just kind of walking around, lost in the middle of the street where there's nobody else around, and just punching in the air, just not knowing exactly what to do with all this emotion, as I can imagine. So in the process of being there and kind of exploring the city and understanding what was going on and try to make sense of it myself, one of the big conversations that was happening at the time was whether they were going to have a Mardi Gras parade or not, right? Whether it made sense to have it. This was, the first time since Katrina made landfall. And in the process of doing that, I met the director of FEMA on the street. And in that process, we started talking, and he said, "Hi, I'm one of the most hated men in New Orleans right now." So obviously I didn't know what he meant by that. So we started talking. He started, bringing in some information about what are the challenges that FEMA faces in trying to provide, trying to implement the recovery efforts in a situation like that. And one of the things that came up is, the fact that people needed to have a deed to their house in order to prove that they lived there before they can provide any assistance. And then, for the folks that wanted assistance right away, one of the things he said was, The only way that can happen basically is if they provide, transfer ownership to us. We do the work and then transfer the ownership back to them, right? So these kind of things kind of stuck in my head, and I remember while I was there, thinking to myself, what can I do? Like in the next event that there's another natural disaster that's impactful like this, what can I do? How can I provide any kind of assistance? But seeing what was happening around, and not coming from that world, in my mind, I'm thinking I'm a manufacturing logistics guy. What can I possibly do here? They need people that can work with their hands and build and fix things. So that stayed with me as I moved back to California. Focusing on the same career path that I was coming from: management, process improvement, manufacturing. Any questions so far? How are we doing?
I don't see
Everybody okay?
raised yet.
Okay, great. So the next set of images that I want to show you guys is basically what I call my R&D period, right? And this is what now starts to transition from the photography that I was doing prior to 2013, 2012, 2013, and the transition to what I'm doing now, right? And it starts with, I think I showed you those already. Yeah, right here. And I call this folder actually R&D, because I think a lot about it in terms of, in thinking about this project and thinking about this presentation, it became evident to me that the approach for me over the last 10 plus years has been like developing a product, right? And taking that product to market, right? So if I'm breaking down the last 10 years of my photography venture, I would say that the first 5 years of that, of those 10 were R&D, right? Really trying to understand how to make the kind of photos that I wanted to make. I remember growing up, like I said, I was focusing mostly on, landscape, because that's what I knew how to do. That's what I had access to. I didn't know how to get close to people. I was intrigued by, I didn't even know this was a genre, but I was intrigued by the photos that I saw that were street photography. I was intrigued by, war photography. But, it's not something that I ever saw myself being able to do. Just photography in general, as a practice for generating income, was never really passed through my mind at that point in my life. It was always something I just did on my own, very much, in solitude, like a game of solitaire, if you will. So let me open this up. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. So I was doing a lot of traveling, right? When I moved back to California in 2006, I started working for a company in Oakland called Rainin. And they do labware manufacturing as well. Started traveling, going to Spain, etc. And I was, making the photos that I was making, a lot of travel photography, and looking for, compositions, looking for making photos. Now, this is one of the last trips that I took. And I don't intend to talk a lot about gear, but I will mention it here, because this is another point of departure for me. So this is, again, I'm back in Puerto Rico again. So this is Puerto Rico, 2014, right? So my first time in Puerto Rico was in 2005, December of 2005. By February of 2006, I was moving back to California. I stopped in New Orleans. I experienced the aftermath of Katrina. I moved forward. Fast forward to 2014, I'm back in Puerto Rico. Again, the same focus that I've always had in my photography, you know, creating images that were for me, okay? So as you can see, you know, the folks that are in there, they're far away. There's no real intimacy in the images other than, you know, the beauty of the composition or the photo itself, the landscape, the cityscape. You know, played around with HDR. And this is actually one of my first landscape photos with my Leica. So here we have a transition point. So what happened in my second trip to Puerto Rico is that I met a photographer that was walking around near the cemetery where I was going to photograph. And he was a Leica photographer. He had two cameras with him, an M240 and a monochrome. You know, and I was walking around with my, you know, my backpack with my two bodies. You know, I think I had, at the time I had a D4, a Nikon D4 and a Nikon D300. You know, the whole kit, 24-70, 70-200, 14-24, the filter sets, etc. Along with, you know, the Gitzo tripod and, you know, just lugging it around, you know, because I needed the equipment to capture the photos that I was making. And then this guy comes along, he's telling me what, you know, how did you manage to take photos with a tripod? You know, explain to him that I didn't have any issues. So when this was going on, I had transitioned from working as a consultant for a software company called Red Prairie, based out of Wisconsin, to the software company, which is the last company I was working with, DA Central in Houston, but their development was done in Vietnam. So right before I took that last trip to Puerto Rico, I was due to fly out to Vietnam. In the process, I meet this guy, and he started telling me about the Leica system. He started showing me how light it is. He was, you know, walking around with two bodies, three lenses in a small, tiny bag. And that was of interest to me because my back couldn't take all that weight anymore. So I decided to invest. You know, he put me in contact with his rep in Miami, and I decided to sell some of the cameras that I you know, had sitting around and invest in the Leica camera system. Now, that's important because it's a different experience as a photographer as it is for someone being photographed to take a photo with a Nikon D4 in a 70-200 or a rangefinder with a 35mm lens, right? Huge difference. So that forced me to change the way I photographed and the way I engaged the scenes and the people that I was going to make part of my work, right? I had to get close physically, not with the zoom. I had to walk up. I had to get comfortable with that, you know, sense of invading somebody's personal space and being comfortable and okay with that. And at the same time, not be threatening, you know? So that's the only key point that I want to say about gear. And I'll talk more about, you know, those, you know, what we may see as a challenge. You know, it's like, how do we deal with the challenge when there's nothing else you can do, right? I don't have a 70-200 lens. I have a camera and a 35mm lens with me, right? So how do I exploit that limitation, right? Which again, it goes back to, you know, the way I approach process improvement in a manufacturing environment, right? Taking in the theories of constraints, for example, right? Optimize and exploit your weakest link. You know, so my weakest link is not being able to get close to a performer, close to somebody giving a speech. So then what can I do to create an image with the limitations that I have? I have a 35mm lens. If I point my lens directly at that person, I have a talking head and a bunch of information in the back that may or may not add anything to that image, right? So then I have to start thinking about my composition and how to add the elements that I want within this frame to make a compelling image, given the limitations that I have in front of me. Does that make sense? So then, go forward. So one of the things that, and I talk about key moments in my life where I just kept pushed, I kept getting pushed further and further closer to dedicating my time completely to photography. In 2012, in May of 2012, I got laid off from my job in the software industry as they were trying to, improve the bottom line. They were getting ready for also to go public, right? So I got laid off on Thursday, and I would say by the following week, I was rehired now as a contractor, a position that lasted for about 2 years. But one of the things that created for me was an abundance of time, because I was no longer in charge of people. I was no longer managing people. I was basically an escalation point, someone that can talk to the accounts and the heads of accounts, managing the accounts, managing the timelines and scheduling and deliverables, but not the direct ownership of the bottom line for that specific business unit, right? So then I said to myself, and I had just received my Nikon D300, which I ordered in January, and it took months to get back in. And I remember at the time, my sister said, she's like, well, I just gotten laid off. She's like, well, you're going to return it, right? I was like, no, I'm not going to return it. I'm going to figure this out, So I became a consultant, and, things just started to cascade from that point forward. In 2009, I met Marcus Lopez at a concert at Yoshi's in San Francisco. We had stayed in touch. He was the band leader for a band called the Mission Barrio Project in San Francisco. It's a long-term musician from Cuba. So in 2013, we reconnect. I think I don't know how, there might have been a concert coming up, and we touched base, and he said, hey, if you know anyone that's looking to manage a band, manage us, we can use the help. And then, at the end, he said, unless you're interested. Well, I have nothing but time now, right? Because I'm just working on really on specific meetings or anything that I have to do. So I said, yeah, I'll take on the challenge. I mean, it was basically what he said is, we need somebody that can, help review the contracts or scheduling, make sure that, we're on top, practices and all that. And I have, this new camera, and now I have access to a band that I can photograph and just, get in there and just do my thing. I said, yes, right? So I started photographing the band. And at some point, one of the other things that happened around that time is that there was a lot of movement in San Francisco, specifically in the Mission District, with the forced evictions from the Ellis Act. So in the process of working with Marcus, I also met Roberto Hernandez, who's coined the mayor of the Mission, because he's been leading the movement in the Mission against, evictions and really maintaining the cultural vibrancy of the Mission. He's one of the founders of Carnival, now in his 45th year. And at some point, all of these things started to intersect, right? My working with Mission Barrio Project, getting a chance to get in close and again, start getting comfortable with closing the distance from the people I photograph, and exploring and having the space and the time to really explore the angles, explore how to create a composition, with people that are moving, so that started me getting into photographing music venues and concerts, and eventually, I photographed a few concerts at SF Jazz, In this particular event, so all of the things that started to intersect right around 2013 is that I was so busy just making photos, I was managing the band, taking photos of the band, getting comfortable with that. And also, like I said before, I met Roberto Hernandez around that same time, and I had already been documenting some of this movement from the eviction, from the anti-eviction protest. Some of the, you may remember when they were blocking the Google buses in Valencia and Mission Street back in those days. So all of those things started to intersect. They had a concert at Acapulco, which was raising funds, for the same anti-eviction programs. And this is one of the photos from that concert. So along the way, one of the things that what was happening is again, those Ellis Act evictions. And, I said to myself, I wonder how much the local people understand, like, what's happening, what are the challenges that are going on. And, I always thought to myself that there was a certain level of responsibility that these software companies had to these communities, and that, it would have been a very nice marketable story to tell, if you created opportunities for the mom and pops, not necessarily to learn what are the latest trends and how to market their business, but really have an opportunity to pass that down maybe to their grandchildren or other family members that can take advantage of that and translate that, to the community. How do I optimize my business now in the digital world? But, those things never happened. And there was a huge disconnect between the way the city was managing these Google buses that were transporting folks from San Francisco to the headquarters in Silicon Valley. So around that time, I started really getting interested in documenting this phenomenon to really create a dialogue within the community, because I found that a lot of folks didn't really understand what was going on unless they were directly impacted. So I'll go through these photos relatively quickly because there's a lot of them. I was just kind of going through my archive and pulling things so we could have the conversation.
It's too fast.
Sorry.
Oops.
Can you hold the images just a little longer,
Mhm.
Harvey?
Sure.
I love reading the signs.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. I had just gotten back from Spain. This is, I think, in January 2015, and they were having the tech awards in San Francisco. And one of the main targets of these protests was the founder of Uber. So you see this gentleman here has his medallion hanging from his neck. So this goes back to the different protests that took place around that time in the Mission District. And this was a teacher that was actually, everything starts to intertwine. And this was a teacher that was living in the house that right down the street from where this photo was taken, where a Google executive, a lawyer from Google, purchased that home and essentially started evicting all the teachers that were living there. And of course, the issue wasn't just happening in the Mission, but it was happening, in Chinatown as well, and towards Market, etc. So in this particular protest, there were a lot of folks that came in from the different districts in San Francisco that had been affected or had been fighting against these unfair evictions over the years. So I mentioned that I purchased the camera, the Leica, and I took my trip to Vietnam and Cambodia. So these are images from that time, or, well, we're still here, sorry. That was out of place. So here they're doing a prayer for Alex Nieto, who was killed in the Mission District while enjoying a burrito, I think, on Valencia Street. He was a security guard on the wing, and was on his way to school. This is Roberto and his son down below. unfortunately, he's passed away since then, as have some of the other folks that came up in these photos. This photo was used as part of the a report that was submitted to the state of California and Sacramento on the state of the evictions in San Francisco. And you notice that they kind of jump around. This is a lot of what I was doing at the time, is photography, these social movements, these actions against, the unfair evictions and what was happening with the tech companies, and how and really the effects that they were having in the community, and led to a lot of these evictions. So one thing I'll say is that in the process of seeing these photos, and you notice that, I'm taking a lot of liberties with the compositions, with the distance that I have. Again, I was interested in photographing people, and these were opportunities for me to do that in an environment where I had the freedom to navigate that space, right? Where I didn't know how to do that outside of an event like this, just in the course of the day. I didn't know how to take my camera out into the streets and start making photos, compelling photos that included the surroundings, the people that made up the communities. Then later on, later in the year, these are now in Oakland. This is shot in film. And then at the same time, I also started photographing combat sports, MMA, jiu-jitsu, and kickboxing. And this is an interesting transition into that space, because again, I had time. I went on Craigslist and I saw an ad from somebody that was looking for a journalist, a writer for MMA fights. That wasn't me. So I still replied. I said, hey, if you ever need a photographer, here's my contact information. 2-3 weeks later, I got a phone call from some guy saying, hey, you replied back to my Craigslist ad. And I couldn't remember, because I didn't reply directly to a Craigslist ad, so it was indirect, right? But eventually our conversation got back to a point of entry, and he said, hey, I need somebody to cover a fight in San Jose this weekend. I've never shot a fight before. I had no idea what to expect or how to do it. So my first point was go to YouTube and start doing research, go to YouTube, how to photograph an event, how to photograph a fight, what do you need? And to my surprise, there was not a lot of information out there. At the time, I had 2 cameras. I had my old Nikon D200 and my, fresh Nikon D300. Luckily, I had the lenses, but I didn't have enough memory cards for the event. I remember, again, going online and trying to find memory cards that that I could use for this. And I found a guy that was selling a memory card in Moraga. And I went to meet him the morning I had to go photograph that show in San Jose. And this is one of those points where it's like, you know, when you start getting all these road bumps along the way, it's like you have a come to Jesus moment, and you ask yourself, like, what's life trying to tell me? Like, should I, look in a different direction? Should I stop, count my blessings, and you just walk away, or push through and persevere? Right? I get to Moraga, I test this memory card, it doesn't work. This guy's like, you have to format it. It's like, I'm formatting it, it's still not recognizing it. It's like, well, let's go back to my place. I was like, I don't have time. I have to go to San Jose. I drive back to Oakland. I get off in the 27th Avenue exit. I hear a guy next to me honking. I look back and he's pointing at my tire. I had a flat tire. It's like, Jesus, what is next, right? So now I have a flat tire. I carried a Fix-A-Flat with me, hook that up, make a left on Broadway, drive down to the Firestone location, have those guys change my tire. I walk back home, get my gear, take an Uber, and on the way to San Jose, I stop at Best Buy, I think in Fremont, buy some more memory cards, and get to the end. Once I get there, like I said, I have no idea what I'm doing, where I'm supposed to be, nothing. I get my press pass and I start setting up in one of the corners where the fighters go. And a photographer that I had, a seasoned fight photographer, came up to me, Adam Hayes. I still remember his name because we were like shooting these events left and right since that day. He's like, hey man, you don't want to set up there, because the guys from CSEC are very anal, and they're gonna scream at you. It's happened to me in the past. Come over here. So he helped me out in that moment, and then I just kind of again, start implementing the things that I do as if I were trying to improve a process, right? Understanding what it is and what are the deficiencies and how do I fill those, So again, I dedicate myself to understanding everything about, how to create these images. Prior to this, my focus and the way I approach photography was always from the composition first, right? I was never into the technical. So I got lucky that I was able to get images that reflected what I saw, but it wasn't coming from an understanding of the technical aspects that would make that image if I wanted to make that specifically. So how to use my f-stops, how to use my shutter speed, how to use my ISO, and how to work around the exposure triangle to understand how to get the effects that I wanted, right? So this is where I had to learn that, because I needed to learn how to freeze motion. I needed to learn how to deal with the different lighting situations that presented themselves, because I have a lot of different lighting in these.
Ooh, can you go slower?
Yes.
Sorry. So what's your typical exposure when you're shooting in a dark place like that?
So I mean, for me, one of the things that that I realized, and in the aesthetic that I wanted to my images, is that light is light, right? So a lot of times when you're shooting these kind of events, people want to blow out the background, So understand again, and I go back to that exposure triangle and understanding how to manipulate and how to adjust for what you want using all of those different levels, right? So at the end of the day, when the light is hitting this fighter, right, it's going to be well lit, right? So I could be at f4, f8 with a fast speed and still get that, depth of field that I can still get the detail in the background, right? Again, and I look at this as a direct link to the photos that I was making in my own time, right? Which was cityscapes and landscapes, right? So I want to include as much of this as possible. So for me, I'm typically shooting, light conditions provided, probably around 5.6 to 5.8, and, trying to be above 1/500th of a second, pushing my ISO depending on the camera because the D200 was not very good at handling low light. So it was, ISO 800 to ISO 1600 to 3200, but at the end of the day, understanding also that that noise really becomes apparent when you're pulling your shadows. I wasn't too concerned about that, right? Because I'm going to crush my shadows anyways. I'm just concerned with the image that's being lit, or I'm sorry, the subject that's being lit, so as soon as I drop the shadows on this image in post, all this is going to go away and he's well exposed. So I'm not going to have any of those issues that I would worry about otherwise. Does that make sense?
Would you go back a couple images? The black and white one or
This one?
yeah.
This one?
Yeah. Thanks.
Again, one of the things that you're going to notice in my photography is that I try to include as much information in my images as possible, because to me, that's part of kind of telling the story, right? And also the challenge within the photography, right? So how do I create an image with as much information as possible, as organized as possible, to give the viewer the chance to settle into the image and explore? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, I find it fascinating to yes, this is in the foreground and this is what the image is about, obviously, but I find fascinating to look at people's faces, what's happening in the crowd. What are the faces of concern? What are the things that stick out to me? So being able to organize all these things allows people to stay a little bit longer within the image, and that's what I try to capture when I'm either this or any other kind of photography that I'm doing.
It seems to be a mix of sports photography with photojournalism.
Yeah,
Because you need that, you need the scene.
right.
But then you've got the sports photography as the subject, but the scene tells you the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and really this comes from, again, not knowing how to, photographing for so long and not knowing how to include people in my scenes, right? But I know how to recognize the scene, right? So then the question here is, what is the subject matter? Is it the background? Is it the scene? Or is it the foreground? Is it the person occupying that space, or is it all of it, And then you can even play around with this guy, right? I mean, you have the leg going straight up and then two arms coming out. So if you want to take a different approach to examining and playing around with this image, you can as well.
It's interesting because that shot it looks like you're pretty close. It doesn't look like that ring is very big. So what are you using, a 35? It doesn't look like a wide angle shot
Yeah, and I didn't clarify this. So for the majority of, actually for all of the fights photos that we're going to see and all of the photos in the mission, that was all taken with my Nikon, either with a 24-70 or a 70-200 lens. So I'm ringside and I'm probably zoomed in here. But the rings are not that big, so like a 24-70 is what I used, I would say 80% of the time.
Yeah. Wow.
These are always my favorite. I mean, there's just this space that that these guys are in, right before they're about to get into the ring, right before they're about to get that last blessing from the you know, from the official over here, giving them the green light to get into that space, right? I mean, it's like you have to think about everything that's happened, you know, prior to getting to this point. You know, the cutting of the weight, you know, the waking up the morning, all of that, and it's just like that energy. It's just so pumped. But being away from it and but also being right inside of it, you start to feel the differences of energy that also the audiences carry. You know, it's a much different audience at an MMA fight than it is at a Muay Thai fight, you know, or that it is like at a jiu-jitsu meet, for example. You know, so I mean, I think we're all familiar with, you know, with the concept of, you know, capturing those moments, right? What did Bresson call it? What would somebody help me with that term? Javier Bresson says, what is it? The decisive moment, exactly, right? So what is the decisive moment? Is it that moment where that person is jumping over the puddle, or is it a look, right? Or is it a combination of all those things, right? So as we continue to add all these intersecting elements to the photo, that becomes a decisive moment, right? You know, the agony of, you know, defeat, you know, the celebration, you know, the camaraderie. You know, this, I mean, these guys have gone through a lot to get to this point, you know, and this is that point of exhalation. This is back in Puerto Rico as well.
I took that guy.
This guy right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've seen him so much. I didn't even realize that until like way after, until I started seeing him over and over again. I was like, oh, this guy. There's a guy in Cuba that's the same way. He has a tattoo of Che on his right above his heart, and he's always showing it off. I remember this one time I was in the street. I was composing this photo, and I'm sitting here, you know, composing, and next thing you know, this guy just appears like right in front of me, right here, with this like he was wearing a yellow net tank top, ripped right under his heart to show off his Che tattoo, and I'm standing there. He wasn't my point of focus or my subject, but now you're there, so now you just became that, right? So I started shooting. So this is actually where I was going when I met this this guy that was a Leica photographer. So now I have my Leica, right? Zero experience with the rangefinder. You know, I remember talking to the guys. I was thinking about getting an M6. He said, "Don't get a film camera. It's just going to become a paperweight." So, you know, I went that way. And one of the things that I remember so clearly is like I was taking these photos and I'm trying to figure this out. And after that, I went to explore some more. And I just remember going home and downloading these images and just seeing the clarity and the sharpness without adding clarity or sharpness in, you know, in post. And I'm just blew my mind. I was like, what the heck? What's going on here? So these are like literally, I had just, you know, unpacked this camera maybe 45 minutes prior. And now I'm just exploring. I'm trying to figure out, how do I use this camera? You know, so I went out on a photo trip, as I always do, you know, just get in my car and just go explore. And now I'm in Vietnam. And now I'm venturing into, you know, making environmental portraits and asking people, approaching people, which again, you know, it's not something that I'm used to. Now I'm in Cambodia. I mean, here, I mean, how I shoot today to how I made this photo is completely different. I mean, you can see the depth of field, right? They're blurred out. So I was probably, I don't know, somewhere at F2 maybe, maybe F3. But today, all of them would be in focus. If I were to make this photo today, my composition would change. I would move around to make sure that there was no overlaps in any of the children because I had the time and I had access to them, right? But lack of confidence, not knowing what I was doing, you know, not trying to look like I didn't know what I was doing, because that's also part of my strategy is just to step up to the plate and move forward and behave as if you know what you're doing, you know, act like that person that you're trying to represent, you know. So I'm trying to be a serious photographer here. So I'm trying to give him that, you know, sense of confidence, you know.
Is that your Leica?
Yes, this is all with the Leica. You know, when I came out, when I came out of this this orphanage, it's interesting here because one of the things that I noticed from, you know, difference between going to Vietnam and Cambodia was just the interaction that you got with the local folks, right? In Vietnam, the folks were very like reserved, right? They kept you at arm's length. Whereas when you get to Cambodia, they're all very warm and close and greeting you. And the phrase was always, "Hi, you know, welcome. Where are you from? You know, what is your name?" So when I'm in this orphanage, I hear what the lesson plan was, and it's the same thing, right? It's, "Hi, what is your name? Where are you from?" Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when I left, this young woman here was selling potato chips. So she was offered me some. I said no, but I buy some for all the kids there. So this is them lining up to get their bag of chips. You know, and this is when I was observing the lesson plan. This is navigating the ruins. Bayonne. And I'll point out to the way that this little boy is dressed, because that also becomes a repeating pattern in some of the photos that I've made throughout the years with children in other places.
Slower, please.
So sorry. Thanks for letting me know. So again, this is a good place to circle back what I was saying before, right? I have a lot of distance between me and my subject, which is him, right? I don't have the ability to zoom, right? So if I put him right in the middle, I probably will not make a very compelling photo, right? So then it's like, how do I incorporate everything else that's around me, and where do I place them so that he can be an anchor point on this image?
On that previous image, though, the black and white allows
It's-
the subject to come out.
Yes, absolutely.
That was color, he'd be lost in
Absolutely.
the tones.
Absolutely. And I think I applied an orange filter on this one as well. So it brings out the skin tones even more. I always wanted to go here. So there are some places where I always wanted to visit. I always wanted to go to the Vatican, because I grew up when I was a boy. I used to love drawing. So I was a fan of Michelangelo. So I always wanted to go to the Vatican. I always loved these ruins, Bayonne. I always wanted to come here. Varanasi is another one, and I'll show you guys some work from there as well. So this is when everything starts to change for me, right? I come back from Vietnam, Cambodia. I now know that I want to get close to people, right? This was my point of entry into that, but I didn't know how to continue that here. So I took my first workshop with at the Leica store, and that's where I met Matt Stewart. these are some of my first actual street photography images in San Francisco. These folks I met, we became friends, we stayed in contact. They are from New Delhi. I'm sorry, Bombay. And in this workshop, I also met Ken, and the following year, Ken started the San Francisco Street Photography Festival. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I need some help. I need some help with assistance for the folks who are going to be leading the workshops. So he reached out, and that's another point where I got the advantage of being able to learn and hear how these world-class street photographers approach their craft. So then I said to myself, I need to have a project where it's focusing on people and focusing more on the storytelling approach. So I went to Mexico City and started focusing on trying to capture photos that told the story about Day of the Dead in the different regions of Mexico. So I started here in San Miguel de Allende.
Please go slower.
Sorry. These are all film. I was shooting with Leica M6 and most likely Tri-X 400. I love pushing my black and white 2-stops. But now you start to see where I'm trying to intertwine, the social eye with the street photography. This is in Cuba. I'm now shooting with the Hasselblad 500 CM. And again, my thing is always to challenge myself to grow and learn. Again, going back to the same processes that I implemented when I was working in manufacturing and supply chain. And this is one of my favorite portraits of that I've made in Cuba. I got there and I was shooting with my Hasselblad, and one of the things that I told myself when I left was that I wanted to photograph Cuba as if I was photographing the places that I was photographing here at home, right? So I used to go to Chinatown all the time, and that's like where I would practice daily, because there were people walking around. I can focus on composition, movement, etc. And I didn't want to ask for any photos. And when I was in Viñales, I'm staying at this bus stop, and I turn around and this guy's standing right there. How can I not ask him for a photo? So I talked to him. I said, hey, I want to make your portrait. And he said, yes. He's like, what should I do? I was like, whatever you would do if I wasn't asking you for a portrait. So he just put his cigar in his mouth and stood there. And I made this photo. I ran to my car to print. I also did a digital version of it so I could give him a copy of it. So I went to the car, got my Polaroid printer, made him a copy of it. And, that was the last time I saw him.
Did he like the image?
Yeah, he did. He was actually just coming into town because his buddy was going to be singing at the local bar. They're local farmers from Viñales, and Viñales is known. Viñales is like the Napa of cigars in Cuba.
It's an excellent photo. What I like about it is the position of your camera is very low. Is that because it was a Hasselblad you're shooting up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. I love it.
I was, I blew out the highlights just a tad bit. You can see here,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's film, and it just, you're able to recover from it. But I mean, the sharpness is just incredible.
Yeah.
Look at his eyes, right? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So these are now, like I said, I photographed a lot in Chinatown and Oakland.
You go a little slower.
Sure.
Sorry.
No. It's all good. I just who know about the time, and I want to make sure that I'm mindful of that too. So now, I mean, so when I talk about that transition and how the 2013 was so critical for my development, is that if I look at, and I was noticing this as I was preparing for this presentation, is prior to 2013, I was my Lightroom gallery, my library, the most in 2012 I had were 6,734 images. Okay. In 2012, I had 6,734. In 2013, which is again when all these things started to intersect, I jumped up to 23,000, almost 24,000 images. Okay. Now, that's 2013. 2014, which is the continuation of shooting fight and shooting protest, and then now getting introduced to another realm of possibilities, which is street photography. In 2014, I went up to 40,000 images, right? I'm shooting daily. I'm not, I'm out there shooting film, shooting digital, exploring everything. And that's why I call this whole area, the R&D, because that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to figure out what are the tools? How do I do this? What is my voice? What do I want to say? How do I say? What's my vocabulary? I don't know any of these terms even, I just know what I'm doing.
What did you
You know,
shoot
so-
that one with?
This one here was again,
Yeah,
this
the-
one here,
no, the back one.
this one.
Yeah,
Same, this is the film, probably. I'm dragging the shutter. Again, I'm exploring. I'm
With the
figuring out
M6?
the things with the M6 as well, yeah.
okay, thanks.
And 35 millimeter. That's been the most consistent lens that I've had, which I absolutely love the way it handles light, especially at night. It's just beautiful. It's a 35 millimeter Summilux FLE. So again, some subtle changes, right? Prior to all this, I shot by myself, all alone. Now I'm building a community. This is my friend Ben, who actually started, who also was one of the photographers that was shooting the MMA, except that he was in Sacramento area. Loved his black and white. He was shooting Fuji, straight out of the camera, JPEG conversion, phenomenal.
Ben's a good friend of mine. He's Ben
You know
Hill.
Ben?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
I love his black and whites are just phenomenal, especially when he was shooting the fights,
Yeah, portraiture is his thing. It's
Yeah.
fabulous stuff he
He's
does.
shooting portraits with the Fuji, I think F50 FGR.
He's,
What's Ben's
Yeah.
last name?
Ilili. It's IILLI. Is that correct?
yeah.
So again, more street photography. Again, getting comfortable with navigating that space. So it's just getting out there and just doing it. Like I said before, I love as many elements and as many moving subjects in the background or in the frame as possible. So that's a challenge for me.
And it has your name.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. So, when I talk about, copy and paste, I mean, here I'm employing the same things that I would do when I was shooting a fight, right? It's anticipating, getting in rhythm with that, with the movement of the street. One of the things that I didn't mention earlier is that, even before the first images that I showed you in Puerto Rico, I was a dance instructor. I taught ballroom dancing for Arthur Murray Dance Studios in Redwood City, because I love music, and my family, we grew up listening to salsa music. So music is a very, personal part of my upbringing. It's like my dad would play music first thing in the morning on the weekends, boleros and tango and all that. So it allowed me to develop a sense of timing and musicality. And for me, when I'm in the streets, when I'm shooting, when I'm primarily in the streets, I mean, I feel like it's a jazz jam, You know, it's like Miles Davis, right? It's like Bitches Brew, just all kinds of instruments coming together, and that's what happens in the streets. Like all these things are happening, and you have to somehow integrate yourself into that rhythm to create an image that comes out as a compelling piece of work that people want to engage with, you know?
Was that Miles?
No, no,
Ah.
these are all in Chinatown. I wish I would have photographed Miles.
I've never been very successful shooting in Chinatown. Are these people okay with you shooting?
Most of these people don't know I've shot them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been turned down quite a few times.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, most of the time, you know, the way that I try to move, I mean, obviously, unless they're post portraits, the way I like to move, and the way I challenge myself in the streets is, again, trying to find that rhythm, you know, so anticipation, understanding the rhythm of how they're walking so that I can get them in a movement that reflects what's happening. These are in Carmel. These are in Santa Barbara area. All these images are in film, you know, and one of the things that's also been a very consistent pattern in my photography is that the yield of photos that I get that I'm pleased with is much higher when I'm shooting film than when I'm shooting digital. This is back in Cambodia.
Can you
Some
say
of them
that
are
again about film versus, what did you say?
what I was saying is that the amount of images that I get from a roll of film, let's say it's 24 or 35, the number of images that I get back that are more pleasing to me, images that I would be willing to share with an audience outside of myself, it's much higher when I'm photographing using film than when I'm photographing in digital. And it's not a conscious decision that I make. You know, it's all of my conditioning that comes with this package, that as soon as I'm holding my film camera, it all kicks in, you know, unbeknownst to me. So like these images for me are very dear because like these scenes no longer exist in downtown Oakland. You know, this is now a high rise. You don't have access to view the Tribune building anymore. This used to be a parking lot, you know, and I used to work right down the street. This is like my first roll of Cinestill that I shot. I've never had a good good results with Cinestill. You know, but like this is one of the images where it's like, you know, we start looking at how my eye for composition movement is developing, right? As we start seeing some revolving patterns, repeating patterns, right? Like you have this shape here, you have this shape here, you have this shape here, you have this shape here. You know, you can make all these different shapes just from within that frame.
And the graffitis. What's
And the
Cinestill?
graffiti. Cinestill is a stock of film like Kodak or Fuji. They came out, I forget, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But their thing is that they were using old cinema film, and they had removed one of the layers from the film that gives it a different effect when you're shooting during the day, or specifically when you're shooting was it a certain kind of light at night, fluorescent light.
That's nice.
So here you can see that this is when I shoot color, I shoot a lot different. When I shoot color now in film, I tend to pull my my film one stop. Here I'm shooting a film I don't typically push. So what I would do on a daily basis, really walk, and I live by Lake Mary, so I would walk to Chinatown and try to understand how the light is changing throughout the day to tell me what are the type of images that I can make during that time frame. So if I wanted to make an image that was, high contrast where I could blow out the highlights, I knew where to go, where the light was coming from to give me that, right? And we also saw it on the previous image with this or a similar woman was walking down the street. Now, this was a long time ago. This is right across from the Harvey Mill Photo Center. Eventually, I made it to Kyoto, another place I really wanted to photograph. And then full circle back to the protest. Okay, you see it's a different little frame. It's the framing is a little different now. It's a little tighter. Different intention, different focus. So that was my R&D, and I know that we're very much over our timeline. So I want to share a little video now, which is a video that I did in Puerto Rico. So that was what I called like R&D, right? When I was trying to figure out like what am I doing? What's my voice? What is it that I'm trying to focus on? I got laid off from my job in the software industry in May of 2018. They said basically the product that I was managing got offshored to Vietnam, and I could either manage another product line or I'd be laid off. I chose to be laid off. This was part of my long-term plan, which was to get to the point where I felt good about making the transition. And one of the things that was important for me is that, similar to what I said before when I went to Cuba, that I wanted to photograph Cuba as if I were at home, I wanted to transition into photography as if I was already making a living through it. I didn't want to have any constraints or any emotional tug of wars with being able to sustain myself on that, right? So this is kind of like, if the first period was R&D, now this is where I'm creating now a product line that I'm trying to sell to the world. So 1 month after I left my job in software, I traveled with another photographer, Dan Fenstermacher, a phenomenal photographer as well, to Puerto Rico. And our focus here was to document the stories of the people that were still recovering from Hurricane Maria, which had hit the shores of Puerto Rico in 2017. And this is a short 3-minute video that captures some of the interviews that we did while I was there. Can you guys hear this?
No.
Yes, I can.
No?
Yes.
Oh, you
somehow.
can.
It depends on who that's answer. I can. Can't hear it though.
It's okay. We have subtitles.
Yes?
Just the things
Everybody
in-
can hear?
No. You
No?
can't hear.
Okay.
You can see
Hold
it.
on a second. You can see it. Okay. Give me
You need to hit that button.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries.
Aparentemente como que se han olvidado que si ya se creen que como San Juan ya está funcionando, pues el resto de los pueblos como que no son importantes.
Si ve la destrucción, ¿por qué no buscan en los campos? Si en los campos viven gente.
Puede ser que esté levantado aquel que no sufrió, aquel que no pasó por esto, que tenga su casa, ya una mansión, tenga todo, viva en el área metropolitana, que no hay un árbol que le tumbó el tubo eléctrico, tú sabes.
Aquí mismo en el barrio tenemos un sector en la misma comunidad que no tiene todavía luz. Son personas mayores.
Ahora mismo aquí, sin luz, de noche. Esto es muy oscuro. Somos las 3 horas. Nosotros no sabemos quién pueda llegar en el momento. Hay muchos sitios que no lo han visitado. Muchos han muerto, que están encamados porque no tienen el servicio eléctrico para sus máquinas.
Yo sabía que ya venía un huracán porque ya yo tengo experiencia espiritual para ello.
Y cuando pasó este ciclón, pues nosotros no estábamos preparados para ello. Yo nunca había tenido una experiencia.
Sí.
Yo pensé que era un viento más.
Pues me fui a la cama, hasta la peja y el pejo se fue a los pies míos. Porque daba pánico, porque el huracán dio pánico, ¿sabes?
Eso era para mí un tornado. Cuando se unieron aquí, ahí fue cuando destrozó todo. El techo lo arrancó completo, se lo tiró allá al mango, me partió ese mango, partió parte de una ceiba que hay ahí.
Sí, me deprimo. ¿Por qué? Porque yo tenía todo, yo tenía plátano, yo tenía guineo, todo. Nadie me dejó nada. Y a veces uno no va al hospital para decir que estamos en depresión, pero uno llora.
Claro.
Había tristeza. Yo soy asmática, yo padezco de epilepsia, yo soy diabética.
Bueno, de FEMA, ¿sí? ¿Cuánto es? 600. 600 pesos. Y eso no da ni por una nevera. La insulina es una cosa que se daña. Y un mínimo potecito así de insulina vale $325.
Que el que se fue, se perdió la bendición de poder construir y de poder ayudar a levantar a Puerto Rico.
El favor de eso que ustedes están haciendo, están tratando de hacer, eso es lo que vale. Porque puede tener millones de pesos en un banco y eso no vale nada. Y si no tiene salud, menos. Porque tú puedes poseer lo que poseas, pero si no tienes salud, no tienes nada.
So that was my first project, specifically focused on, on telling the stories of other folks, and we had no contacts. We didn't know anyone there, but we knew what we wanted to do. So as soon as we landed, we just got to work, talking to everybody that we encountered. This is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to do. How can you help us? Who do you know? Who can you put me in contact with me? And our shuttle driver from the airport to the car rental agency said, hey, during the recovery after the hurricane, my sister has this nonprofit. I know this other person. They put us in contact with those folks, and we met the next morning. And one of the things that stuck in my mind is being at this cafe and ordering a breakfast sandwich, and the breakfast sandwich is like $13-14. I was like, man, that's a lot for a breakfast sandwich. But nonetheless, we weren't here for a long time, so we had to get to work. So I'm going to go through these images relatively quick. I didn't know any of these folks. I got introduced to them by Betsy Collazo from Relief for PR, and Caridad Sorondo, who was doing a documentary. She's a director and a historian, and she was actually doing she had to make a piece about this town called Morovis, who was about to celebrate their 200th anniversary of being incorporated. And when she got to the town, she saw the devastation. She said, there's no way I can do a story on this with the way this is. And she started a nonprofit to help rebuild that town. So those were our two main points of contact that through them, more contacts branched out. These are photos that are not part of the series that I have on my website. I wanted to show you guys something that you couldn't have access to already. So if you have any questions, again, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just go through these images. But I will say that this is a FEMA warehouse. And this is actually in the town. I went back to the town where I photographed that wedding that you saw in the first image. This is the church. So now this is in 2018. And we went there so I could connect back with the mother of the woman whose wedding I photographed. There was an emergency, we couldn't connect, but through having just being there and saying, we're going to go and we're going to make the best of it. While we were gassing up to go to the next stop, we met this guy that worked at this warehouse that was run by FEMA, that was a warehouse full of water. Water being one of the components that most of these folks didn't have access to, if not all of them, for 9 months.
What does this flyer say?
So this is surviving the disaster, Wednesday the 13th of June 2018 from 6 to 9 p.m. So it's really a workshop on how to deal with the, with the trauma left behind after the disaster. So again, now I have another point of contact with FEMA from 2016 when I met the director in New Orleans. This is Angel. And Angel Gonzalez, 84 years old, lived with his dog Paloma in the mountains of Jayuya. His story is what eventually solidified my focus on documentary photography. He and I connected from the very beginning. I made a lot of photos while I was with him and listening to his story and just engaging with what he had to share with us. On our way to the next town of Morovis, where Caridad Sorondo had our contacts there, we couldn't move forward because the weather was so bad. It was raining, the terrain was not safe. So we pulled over in the town of Utuado at the bar, same thing, start networking, start talking to people, saying what we're there for. In the process, I sent an email to Caridad Sorondo to let her know that we weren't gonna make it to the location. I shared Don Angel's story. I shared some images, what was going on. And this immediately triggered a grassroots campaign to provide assistance to these folks. That campaign eventually made it out to the local newspapers that did a story on him. That story made it to the governor of Puerto Rico, and the wife and the governor both donated a living room and a bedroom set in the recovery efforts that campaign drew. So this is where I begin to answer that question of how do I help? What can I do when these situations exist that I have access to, right? In 26, when I was in Katrina, I didn't know what to do. Here, I'm putting into action all of the things that I've learned along the process, networking and communication and everything else to affect change, right? And at this point is where, I found what that voice was, which prior to that was hidden everything that we've seen so far, right? But there were clues of it hanging there to connect those dots. Now, this is an important image because you'll notice that the tone is blue. I am sitting directly in front of them. I have two cameras with me. I have my M6 and I think at this time I had an M10. And prior to getting started, I would prep them, say, this is what's going to happen. If you see me pick up my camera, don't panic. I'm just making a photo because I saw something of interest to me. Just keep going. I was so focused in the interview process and what was going on that I didn't realize that the tones of the room were blue. When I got back to my room, I download the images and I see this image, or the first of the series, and I asked myself immediately, like, what happened with my camera? Why didn't it recognize the white balance? Why didn't it correct it? In talking to my friend Dan, he said, what are you talking about? The room was blue, right? Because his images looked the same way. And that's where it's just like, it hit me, right? And it got me thinking about what are the influences or what are the effects of living your life during the day under blue light? We know that color affects our emotions. You know, and one of the stories that kept resonating on here was the mental health issue. You know, how many people were committing suicide. Here we're going into the city of Ituado, where a lot of folks had been committing suicide, jumping off the bridges and so forth. So these blue tarps, again, have another echoing effect from what had happened or what I had experienced in Katrina or in New Orleans after Katrina. So I'm definitely looking for ways of capturing all of the different angles that reflect how these blue tarps become part of the scenario, part of the landscape. So that's everything from that I had to share from Puerto Rico. You know, from there, I took off to India. And what I'm going to show you guys here is actually a PDF. And this is really just the after effects. Like I said, one of the places that I really wanted to go to in India was Varanasi. And one of the instructors that had been in San Francisco a year prior was Vinette Vora. I was his assistant at the San Francisco Street Photography Festival. When I got to India, I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, I'm in Delhi, and what's up?" He said, "I'm going to Varanasi tomorrow to start this workshop." And I said, "I'm going to Varanasi tomorrow as well." So along the way, there's a lot of people that have helped me develop my skill set. At the end of 2021, I think it was, I had reached out to a photographer from the Bay Area that I met while photographing protests at 850 Harrison in San Francisco, and this is during the George Floyd protest. Darcy Padilla, and you know, we kept running into each other at these events, at these actions in the Bay Area. Looked her up, looked at her work. Immediately became a fan of her long-term projects that she did in San Francisco, in the Tenderloin. Following a 20-year span of a woman that she met as a young woman with a newborn baby, and her transition to essentially the grave as a victim of AIDS. So I reached out to her, and again, you know, in my previous career, it's like, you know, if I need something done, it's like, you know, you hire the people that are going to fill that gap, right? That give you that information. So I reached out to her. I said, "Hey, I need some help editing my work." I was starting to look at submitting to festivals and so on. And you know, the first thing that she said to me when I showed her my work, my edit from Puerto Rico, was like, "Dude, you have to work on your editing," right? So after that, I made it a focus to look at the work that I had, and then to create a zine and to focus and to work on my editing, right? So this is that first transition into it. So this is a PDF of the scene that I created. It took me a year to edit this because, again, I was working through it, printing pieces, working in the sequencing. I carried it with me everywhere I went. If I had a camera bag or I had a camera with me, I had the zine with me. And anyone that I encountered that had the time to look through it and give me some critique, I would welcome it always. And this is the result. These were all taken in Varanasi along the Ganges River early mornings. These were originally shot in color with a Leica M10 and a 28mm lens, converted to black and white using Silver FX Pro. How are we doing on time?
It's 8:49. We've lost some people about in the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay.
Lost a few.
How late do you want me to go? How far do you want me to go into this?
Let's wrap it up by 9.
Okay.
That was my favorite bit of stuff. I loved it.
Thank you.
I'd say that's very well edited.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
Like I said, it took me a long time, but I really wanted to make sure that I integrated all of the things that were important to me. You know, the design aspect of it, the transition between one image to the other, you know, where your eyes transition to within the next page, how each image communicated to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't until I felt, you know, 100% comfortable with that edit that I proceeded to actually, you know, manifest it into physical form.
More.
Great.
So in the interest of time, so that was in 2018, right? And what happened since then, more of the same, right? More street photography. I started documenting in 2020 when the pandemic started. I was getting ready to have a show, part of a group show at the LA Center of Photography, showing my work from Puerto Rico, but the pandemic happened, that never went through. And then after the George Floyd incident, I became very active again, documenting everything that was going on in the community. So for that amount of time, from 2020 to 2021, I was very much active in documenting everything that was happening in the Bay Area, in terms of that, you know, that event, those events that were going on at that time. Fast forward to 2021, where, you know, we have a vaccine, we're able to travel. I start to notice, again, the same parallels that I noticed, some of the things that I noticed when Puerto Rico was happening, right? Which is when Puerto Rico, or when Hurricane Maria hit the shores of Puerto Rico, there were actually 2 back-to-back hurricanes, Irma and Maria, that happened within a couple of weeks of each other, and they were both category 4 and 5. So in 2020, the same thing happened now in the Pacific with hurricanes Iota and Eta, which were also hurricanes category 4 and 5, but this time hitting the Pacific, hitting Central America and not the Caribbean. And at the same time, we're also having record-setting fires here in California, right? So that's always been the balance point for me. It's like, whenever we're dealing with record-setting fires here for obviously lack of water, somewhere else in the world, very close to us, there's another extreme, and that's the excess of water, right? And then in between, we have how water also manifests itself in different forms and causes natural impacts to the communities, right? Like the freezes in Texas, for example. So let me go into that work. So when I was able to travel, I went to Guatemala. My initial place to go to was Nicaragua, my home country. But because of the things that were happening there and still happening, I wasn't able to fly in there with my cameras to do the work that I wanted to. But also I wanted to start focusing more on creating a more granular view and more expansive view on what happens within these communities and what are the after effects of it. Again, thinking about, you know, process improvement and thinking about how I looked at issues, trying to understand what happened before and what happened after, right? So here I went initially to Guatemala as an add-on or a continuation to the work that I had done in Puerto Rico. Eventually, once I sat down with the work and I started to understand exactly what were all the complexities and the nuances that exist within that country and within that that representation of the project, which is now the nuances that exist for migration, because the folks in Puerto Rico felt abandoned by the people that left. Meanwhile, the folks in Guatemala, specifically at this mountaintop where this photo was taken, they're praying to the Nahuatl gods for the protection of those that have left the community to pursue the American dream, right? So as I'm going through this work and trying to determine what it is that I want to do with it, I found that it was necessary for me to expand to really show what are all the different elements that that are happening within Guatemala from the point of access that I've had, right? And there's still several images that are missing here, which is when I managed to go to the border of Mexico City and Guatemala in the northernmost part of Guatemala by the Tabasco border, and the military airport in Guatemala City, where they were receiving migrants that had been deported from the US, Mexico. So this is a first pass at a sequence of the images that I have now for me to determine what are the holes that I still need to fill to bridge the gaps in terms of telling that story in a more holistic way. So this is just a work in process as well. This is just my artist statement that you can read on my website as well. And that's the end of that.
That's fascinating. I love your progression.
Thank you so much. Sorry that it took so long to get to this point.
I would put the footsteps in the mud as your last image.
The footsteps in the mud, you like that one?
Yeah, I like that.
But that is the last image. It's just a
Let me
nice
see,
one.
where is that image? You know, it's always fascinating to me, like, what are the images that resonate with people? And that's one of them that always resonates with folks, is the footsteps in the mud.
Yeah.
That was some beautiful light or overcast, cloudy.
Yeah, you know, that photo was actually taken at the one year anniversary of the of the tragedy that that took the lives of 58 people at that village. You know, so in making this work, I mean, so many things that you have to relearn. You know, when I first started doing the interviews in Puerto Rico, I got to a point where, you know, I was just coming out of a corporate mindset, right, where I had been a manager and having to carry my voice, you know, and making sure that what I was saying was the last word in the conversation. At one point, when I started having this interaction with Gerardo, who was the gentleman in the couple in blue, I noticed that we started having this tug of war, you know, where he wanted to say what he wanted to say, which had nothing to do with what I was asking, you know, so that we were tugging at each other. And at some point, I just had this point of reflection. I was like, what the heck am I doing? You know, this is not about me. This is about him, you know. And as soon as I let go, you know, his frame of mind and his state also changed. and he became more open about sharing his experience. And by the end of the whole thing, he said, man, I didn't realize how much I needed to talk, how much I needed to let this out, and that's also another repeating element or fact that I've noticed in all of these different scenarios that I've had the privilege of being in, to learn about the humanity of these folks and their struggle and their perseverance, which takes me back to the work that people do here, grassroots level, on the ground, providing mutual aid. I mean, this is the help that gets out to these communities directly. Women have been leading this charge from the very beginning. Puerto Rico, the two women that I work with, like I said, they were superstars. When 2020 came along and migrant workers in Santa Rosa and up north were affected by the fires and the pandemic and COVID, it was small mutual aid communities that were going out there and providing assistance to anybody that needed it, and so for me, I see myself somewhere in that same vein where it's like, I have a tremendous privilege to be able to go to these communities and provide this kind of assistance, because the photos obviously aren't affecting them directly, and they're not necessarily going to see the effects of it outside of me being there in front of their faces with a camera. But one of the things that allow me to do this is, I come from 20 years of hiring, firing, interviewing, and having to deal with human resources, so along the way, it's made me a pretty good listener, and even though I understand that my approach or the way I go into this is a very methodical way in how I've navigated the different phases of my life, I still understand that there's a cadence that's required to navigate this space, to give these folks the space they need to communicate their grievances and engage with their trauma in ways that maybe they haven't had an opportunity to engage with, because as one of the women in the video said, of course we feel depressed, but we don't have time to go to the hospital. We don't have time to say I'm depressed, because we still have to figure out how we're going to get water and electricity and keep the power up in this generator, and how are we going to get the money to pay for the gas that powers that generator, so anyways, it's a long-winded presentation. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope that you guys were able to get something out of it, and if you have any questions or any doubts or anything that you want to ask me now or in the future, please feel free to reach out and
Where are you?
ping me. I'm in Oakland. So I'm just across the bay. And like I said, for me, this is all a work in progress. So if the first 5 years was my R&D phase, the next 5 years is kind of developing the product. Now it's like getting it to market, right? Now it's, what do I do with all this information? How do I continue, doing this kind of work? Because I feel that, through, and, stuff you mentioned it in the bio, is that all of these things that I've gone through, from, coming to this country when I was 8 years old, it's been development. It's all been additive. Right. So learning how to navigate a space that's completely new. Right. The only thing I have available to me is my eyes. I don't have a voice because I don't know how to speak the language. So my eyes tell me if you're a friend or foe, so I have to pay attention to all these things. So throughout the years, that continues to develop, and then you add different aspects of it, and then you just add and copy and paste and repurpose for the next thing that you're doing, so that's why when 1 month after leaving the software industry, I wasn't afraid to engage with people, because I already am a people person. I already am curious. I'm going there with no hidden agenda other than, to understand how to answer these curiosities I have and to have clarity from what I'm seeing or what's being reported to me.
Sandy has
So that comes across. What's that?
Sandy has a question.
Oh yes, hi Sandy.
Yes, I just want to say that it's really inspirational to have you go through the process that you went through, and to see how you learned. And you weren't specific on what your answers to your questions were, but it's amazing to see the result of the photographs that you took in chronological order. And let me see, I had a question and I forgot it.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're all here because we like making images, we like looking at images, and none of us came out, with a contract to Magnum, So yeah, it's a process, it's a transition.
Mallory has a question.
No, well, I have a comment, and I think good photographers, which I think you are, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me whether it was the Leica or whatever you were shooting with. It didn't make any difference. In fact, some of the earlier stuff I liked the contrast of, and so thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry I was late.
No.
But are we?
We were both late.
Well,
I was late.
Did we record the beginning? Because I
Yes.
really wanted to see the beginning photos that I haven't seen. So
We actually
good.
have a cool photo challenge that Harvey helped me. Should I show it or should I just post it?
Yeah, why don't you show it?
Both.
Okay. We get it together here. But I think it'll be a fun one for us to play with. And Harvey, if you feel like coming on and peeking at everybody's challenges,
I would, absolutely.
We'll try to remember. I'm looking for, okay, here we go.
Please remember to invite me.
I will. Oh, you're not in there yet? You're not in
Sure.
the Facebook page? So this is our June challenge is shoot with movement. And this is one of Harvey's images. It's a beautiful shot.
This is from Carnival this past year, actually.
In San Francisco, yeah.
Yes.
Love this photo. So lots of movement, lots of blur. I think it'll be a fun challenge. And I'll put it on Facebook in the morning. I don't know about you guys, but it's past my bedtime.
Yes, I'm so sorry it took so long, and
No, you were
glad
perfect.
for sticking around.
I missed starting at 6:30 in the morning, or at night. Sorry, 6:30 in the morning. 6:30 at night. We used to start. It was just, but we have people from all over, so we had to kind of.
Oh, good.
No, that was
Good.
amazing.
This is my lunch.
Definitely enjoyed that presentation.
Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much. And like I said, if you guys ever have any questions, you guys want to shoot, whatever, I just want to shoot. I just want to make photos. So it doesn't matter what it is, where it is.
Join us for
if I'm available, I'm there.
Come to our one of our field trips.
I love it.
They've
Absolutely.
been very fun. I have loved them, and usually it's such a small group. I wish more people would come, but what started out, we were photographing the barn in Point Reyes, and we went on a walk and we met this quirky gentleman and ended up doing some fun portraits of him. I mean, it just evolved, and it was so much fun, and I always walk away so happy and enjoy it so much. So please come with us, and I'll invite you to the Facebook page. I thought you were already on our Facebook page.
I'll check if I am. I'm not a big Facebook guy. I have everything linked to my Instagram, which is where I share most of my work, and that transferred directly to Facebook. One of the things that happened when I was shooting fights is that back in the day, in order to tag a fighter, you had to be friends on Facebook, right? So then I ended up with, almost 2,000 friends that I don't know. you know, but I needed to tag him on the photos that I took at the fight. So it became like a lot of clutter. So I don't navigate Facebook quite as much, but I will definitely sign up for the club. And I have to say, you know, one of the things that is for me has been instrumental in all this is also having a community. You know, back in 2020, early 2021, I took a class with Matt Black. It was a master class on, you know, documentary projects. The class was great, and it was right before I went to get started on this project that we saw last in Guatemala. But really what came out of that, which was even more significant and has been a higher value to me, was a group that we created with 4 of the attendees of that workshop, where we've been meeting, you know, for the last year and a half on a monthly basis, you know, keeping ourselves up to date in what the projects that we're doing, what images are going, providing an honest critique, and having just that space to talk about the work that you're doing and share, you know, and then print your work, because there's nothing like having an actual, you know, piece of, you know, material that you manifested through your eyes. You know, I think that's something that we're losing track of, and I hope to continue shooting film as much as I can, as long as I can afford it, you know, because it's like, it's one of, as photographers, it's one of the last things that we have where it's manual, where we're not looking at something backlit, you know, and it's specifically important to kids nowadays because it gives them an opportunity to understand the process of creating something, right? And that they can put their hands into an analog process and still create work that's phenomenal, you know. And we need that because, you know, this disconnect that this digital world has created it goes beyond just the tactile. It also goes into our emotions and the way that we interact with people, you know. And we see that in Facebook with all the, you know, all the typing and all that. It's just like, let's live, let's be a community, you know.
Sandy has a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remembered what I was going to ask.
Awesome.
I assume that you speak Spanish.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how different it was, or if it was harder in Cambodia and Vietnam, where you didn't have the language.
Yeah, you know, with Cambodia and Vietnam,
But
it was
whoever's not muted, could you please mute because it's hard to hear.
for Vietnam, it was not as difficult. I was there for work primarily, so I always had somebody that could translate for me. And in Cambodia, I found that in most cases, and this was the experience that I had before, and I think I kind of mentioned that, you know, on the day-to-day, I found the folks in Vietnam a little more, they kept you more at arm's length, you know? But because the folks, specifically where I went in Cambodia, you know, folks, you know, were able to communicate in English, you know? So I hired a driver for like, I think $25 a day, which meant all day. So I would say, I want to go here, I would go there. And, you know, it was great. He spoke English. We're still connected, I think on Facebook, actually. You know, but it was great because he knew what I wanted to do. He was in touch with the images that I wanted to take, and, you know, it worked out. But I also was making different kind of work then, you know, and I think, and even even speaking Spanish, the experience of engaging the folks in Puerto Rico versus the experience of engaging folks in Guatemala is completely different because of their history as well. You know, one of the things that I had to be very mindful of, and I learned this being in Guatemala as I was working with some of the photojournalists that I knew through networking on Instagram, was how dangerous it could actually be to just go into a community with your camera, you know, blazing, taking photos. You know, it's like you have to understand the history of these communities and what are the challenges that could mean to you. You know, so like one of the things that they said to me is like, if you go into any town or any village and somebody comes up to you and they said, hey, we're going to need you to leave now, you know, it's to leave now. You know, and they said, you know, the nicest they are, the more gentle they are in their approach to letting you know to get the heck out, the faster you should leave. You know, because you know, we have to understand what these communities have gone through historically, you know, from their babies getting kidnapped at birth during the revolution and getting, you know, given up for adoption, you know, to a genocide of the indigenous folks. You know, so automatically you have to understand the privilege that you go into these communities with and be able to tap the brakes in the conditioning that we have coming from the US, where we know that we're protected in the streets by being a photographer, right? It's like that we have that access to make images regardless of whether we have somebody's approval or not, you know, and that carrying that ego with you into these communities could be dangerous. So you have to kind of pause and understand exactly what it is that you're getting yourself into. You know, not just for your own protection, but just for the sake of being able to create a holistic body of work, you know, that has a true engagement with the community versus, you know, parachuting in and just shooting from the treetops. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I was chased by a man in Kibera outside of the settlement area outside of Nairobi in 1970 before
Wow.
I knew about Kibera. And I was literally frozen, paralyzed with fear. And somebody had to come and take me away before he got to me with the machete. And he thought that
Wow.
I was from the city council because I was white. And yeah, that was quite a lesson.
Yeah, just a machete, huh?
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, and you know, that's one of the things that we I think we have to be mindful of when we engage these kind of projects, or when we go outside our, you know, immediate communities, is that, you know, how do I ignite past traumas? You know, it's like, and that's the thing, it's like, you know, in my bio, you know, I talk about how my experience as an immigrant and a person of color really is what influences a lot of my work, right? But that's only that bio is only relevant really here in the United States, right? Because the minute I land in Mexico or in Guatemala or in my own country of Nicaragua, you know, because I don't walk the same way, I don't dress the same way, I don't sound the same way. I think in my mind that my accent is the same, but they know right away that I've lived most of my life here in the United States, right? So what am I attracting to myself when I go in there? You know, so yeah, you know, that what I was saying is that bio only has the desired effect here, right? When I'm in Guatemala in a village which is made up by primarily farm working Mayans, I'm the white man, right? When I'm in Colombia, in Cartagena, you know, and you know, I want to take a photo of Black women selling fruits in the road, right? When they address me, when they call me, they're gonna say, "Hey, you white boy," right? So that's also something that, as a photographer that has, you know, essentially built myself as a man here in this country, right? And understanding, you know, the challenges that I face because of how this man looks, that I have to decouple myself from that experience when I am outside of the United States.
What do you say when they say white, hey, you white man? How do you
Well, you know,
respond?
the first time that happened, it was actually exactly that scenario. I was in Cartagena in Colombia, and I didn't realize they were talking to me. You know, I just didn't know because I've never been called white. I've never been called a white boy. You know, I came to this country when I was 8 years old. I came to Belmont, California, The only other children of color there were from Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico, Native American, multiple generations separate from their original folks living here. So I've never had the experience of being called a white boy. So when she was calling out to me, I'm looking over, I was like, where is that white boy? And then she said, yeah, you, white boy, you, pretty boy, come over here. And I was like, oh, wow. It's like, that was my first experience of being called white, right? So then what does that mean? So now I have to take this information in and try to reconcile it emotionally and cognitively, because that's going to dictate the way that I approach projects. Again, understanding this outside of my comfort zone, and I don't know that, you get exposed to that until you're actually in the line of fire, But yeah, no, I mean, and I get it. It's like I'm a very analytical person. So part of all this process that doesn't get highlighted in the images that I show is all the time that gets spent, in introspection, and connecting with the work and understanding, like, why am I attracted to this? Why am I pulled to this? What does it mean? What am I trying to answer? What questions am I trying to answer about me and my history and my past, with this interest and with these subject matters that I'm focusing on, and I'm a product of climate change, right? It's social, it's political, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's an uprooting of me and my roots, so what does that mean? I can look at it and live my life trying to, I don't know, ignore the fact that, there's a rupture there, right? Or I can try to focus on understanding, what are the breadcrumbs, like where do these roots come from? Where do I find strength in them? And that's part of my process as well. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Good.
All right. Well, I will send you a recording tomorrow.
No worries.
It'll be good for you to watch it. It'll be nice for you to see.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Do we also get it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll put it on YouTube and I'll put it on Facebook. And I
Great.
sent you an invite as well, Harvey.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I really hope you'll join us at our next field trip.
Yeah.
Are you
If
a
I'm here, I'm
morning
flying out to Mexico at the end of the month. I have a
Sandy?
project I'm kicking off with her, but if I'm here, I'm definitely going to be there.
Are you a
Good.
morning person or an afternoon person?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
I sleep on average about 4.5 to 5 hours. So I'm a morning and a night person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Why the question?
Because Sandy and I are not morning people, and we
Oh,
go.
really? You're night owls? So you're getting ready to get started just about now then.
I'm having lunch after this.
We had
Nice.
our field trip was for 8 in the morning. And so 3 of us went in the morning and 2 went at night.
Oh, wow.
Well, Stephanie
So
and
you
I
just
are
you just put a number up, 8, and then
Yeah,
people
8,
have to
8
determine
night or
AM or
8
PM.
p.m. 8
I like
p.m.
that. Everybody's covered.
Yeah, Stephanie and I are both morning people.
Yes.
Yeah.
We both have well, not little kids, but we both have kids.
I love mornings. I mean, it's like one of my favorite things was walking around the lake or running when I was able to run. And like around 6:30, 7 o'clock, the sun's just coming out, it's hitting your face, and your blood is moving, and you're just ready to take on the day and the world. It's like
You're
nothing
fresh.
better than that.
You're fresh.
Absolutely.
No, I stress out at night.
Take a few naps in the middle of the day, and 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock comes along, and you're ready to get started all over again until 2, 3 in the morning.
Looks like Marianne left, but she left you a very nice note.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Well
Thank you
done.
so much, guys.
Well done.
welcome.
Harvey. Thank you very
Thank,
much.
thank you so much. We're so
I
grateful.
appreciate it.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
That
Hope
was
to
great.
hear from you guys and see you again soon.
Hope
Ciao.
so.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Steph.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.
I'll be in bed in 2 minutes.